Um, so I'm going to welcome to our program this morning Jack Bales, who has already been uh, uh, exposed to the Fred yesterday as a panelist
Mhm.
in a discussion about William Hulbert. And his presentation today is actually his based on his research on William Hulbert and some of his early activity in Chicago. So what I would like to do is I'd like to introduce Jack
Mhm.
and uh, Jacob, if Jack needs any instructions with the slides, I hope you can provide that for him.
Mhm.
Okay, Jack, you want to take it away?
Okay, I'm going to share my screen here. And let's see here. Here we go there and share, and that should be it.
You have it. If you want to maximize it, you
Yep.
can do that. Yep,
Okay.
you have it.
Are we all set then?
Okay, great.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to take it away here. Thank you very much, Peter, and thanks everybody for being here. And this is my very first Fred, and I've enjoyed it so far. And thank you for having me. And in my presentation today, I want to discuss William Halbert and the formation of the Chicago Baseball Association, the expiration of the association's charter in 1876, how Halbert and his friends quietly formed the Chicago Ball Club to replace the association, and then how Halbert disenfranchised and bought out the old stockholders to gain control of the new baseball organization. Now, when William A. Halbert, president of baseball's National League, died on April 10, 1882, sports writers praised his leadership as the founder of the league in 1876. Stockholders, officials, and ball players of the Chicago Ball Club, of which Halbert was also president, gave their eulogies. And one of several resolutions they unanimously adopted was that the club stockholders had lost, quote, a zealous friend, a zealous and trustworthy custodian of their interests who was ever true to the trusts submitted to his care. Now, some of the shareholders of the old Chicago Baseball Association, which was the predecessor of the Chicago Ball Club, which of course is now the Cubs, might well have objected if they had heard Halbert referred to as a trustworthy custodian of their interests. And obituaries mentioned his unerring instinct of right, but Halbert's sense of what was right sometimes meant only what was right for him. And in 1876, as I'm going to discuss, he had run over many of the stockholders as he sought to restructure the Chicago Ball Club the way he wanted it. Now, William Ambrose Halbert was born in 1832 in Burlington Flats, New York, some 15 miles west of Cooperstown, and was 2 years old when his parents moved to Chicago. And after attending a college preparatory school in Beloit, Wisconsin for a year, he returned to Chicago where he became successful in the coal industry, wholesale groceries, and as a grain dealer, obtaining a position on the Chicago Board of Trade. And although he is not an athlete himself, Halbert was proud of Chicago baseball. And in 1870, he purchased a share of stock in the city's first professional baseball franchise. And unfortunately, the Great Chicago Fire of 1871 prevented the team from finishing out the season. But a year later, Halbert and others formed the Chicago Baseball Association, with Halbert elected, as you can see, a director. In August of 1874, the stockholders held an election for officers, and with members casting 52 votes in his favor, Halbert was reelected a club director. Edwin F. Dexter, who was a bookseller and a stationer, he received 44 votes, and he joined him on the 5-person board of directors, along with Philip Wadsworth. He was an importer and commercial merchant. He got 42 votes. George Gage, a well-known city park commissioner and businessman. In fact, right today in Chicago, there's a community area and a park named for him on the city's southwest side. He got 39 votes, and Charles Bartlett, a railroad executive, got 34. Note there at the bottom with a well-known ball player, James Jimmy Wood, he received 13 votes. Runner-up was Thomas Courtney, he got 18 votes. Hubbard also became secretary as well as a director. In 1875, he was elected president after the death of club president Gage. And by the way, thanks go to John Thorne for sending me this nice share of stock with Halbert's signature there at the bottom in the middle. Now, White Stocking fans were certainly looking forward to the start of the 1876 season. In July 1875, Halbert had quietly signed Boston's ace pitcher Albert Spalding, who had joined the club as secretary as well as captain. And also on board were Spalding's teammates Ross Barnes, James Deacon White, Cal McVeigh, as well as the star of the Philadelphia Athletics, Adrian Anson. And on July 8th, the White Stockings began an 11-game winning streak that on August 1 put them solidly in first place, 7.5 games in front of the St. Louis Brown Stockings. And about this time exactly, in fact, the Chicago fans noticed that the White Stocking directors were making no efforts to acquire ball players for the next season. And on July 30th, the Chicago Daily Tribune mentioned that people had been asking about this, and the newspaper wrote, "The answer is that Mr. Hulbert should be given the credit for assembling the only first-class team Chicago ever had. So it should be he should be let alone in his movements for 1877. He will do just what is best, no doubt." Now, there was little doubt that what occurred was certainly best for William Hulbert. An article in the Chicago Inter-Ocean relates that the Chicago Baseball Association's 3-year charter had expired in the spring of 1876, and quote, "It therefore follows that the officers were not in a position to make any contracts for 1877, unquote. But the officers could, however, wind up the affairs of the old company. So Halbert and director Edwin Dexter got to work. William Murray, who was a grain dealer, just like Halbert, assisted them. And by the way, in 1860, Halbert married one Jenny Murray. And I tried and I used Ancestry and genealogists helped me, but I could find no connection between Jenny Murray and Halbert's friend, William Murray. Now, the men filed a corporate charter with the state of Illinois, which outlined their plans for a new baseball club. And its purpose, they wrote, quote, was to foster and elevate our national sport, the game of baseball. And Halbert, not surprisingly, was elected president of this brand new organization, and other board members of the new Chicago Ball Club. The old one was called the Chicago Baseball Association. This included Albert Spalding, who was secretary, good old Edwin Dexter again, William Murray again, and also a fellow grain dealer named John B. Lyon. And the club's capital stock was fixed at $20,000 divided into 200 shares of $100 each. Now, contrary to popular belief, and I've seen this in quite a few Cubs histories, Halbert did not come on board as the majority stockholder of the new organization. And this is just conjecture on my part, perhaps with his friends at his side, perhaps he did not feel it necessary to immediately at any way, have a controlling interest. Because his good friend Murray headed the list of 32 subscribers with 50 shares. And here is a list of the other top shareholders, with Halbert not even near the top 22. The prominent stockholders were Edwin Dexter again, the civic leader Norman Gassett, he'll play a role here coming up, Chicago banker John DeCoven, and Charles Bartlett, who was a railroad executive and a director of the Chicago Baseball Association. And first baseman Cal McVeigh purchased 5 shares. And I was kind of surprised to see McVeigh and Barnes as subscribers. But then a newspaper article quietly mentioned that the talented baseball players would be offered a chance to purchase stock, with the hopes that they would be encouraged as stockholders to remain solid, proficient players. But not everyone was given this opportunity. And this arrangement was all, very nice and cozy for Hulbert and his friends. But what about the other investors in the old Chicago Baseball Association who were not shareholders in the new Chicago Ball Club? And one journalist declared that a few of the original officers had known early on that the organization would be losing its license in the spring of '76 and therefore its legal status. So they, quote, quietly set to work, obtained a charter for a new association, elected officers, issued new stock, which was all disposed of before some 20 or 30 old stockholders were even aware of the movement. And naturally, these disenfranchised individuals were objected to being shut out of the new group. And they took out newspaper ads in Chicago's papers, and they urged all stockholders of the association to attend a special meeting to discuss, quote unquote, important business. And about a dozen of the stockholders met, but not much was accomplished. But newspapers did report that the disgruntled investors hired an attorney, quote, to ascertain what their rights are and to fight for them. The stockholders, however, probably did not have much time for legalities, because on this exact same day of the meeting, Halbert and the officers wrote the National League Secretary Nicholas Young that they and the new Chicago Ball Club wanted to join the National League of Professional Baseball Clubs. And he added in his letter that, quote, as soon as our organization shall be completed, we will forward new particulars. Now, Halbert was moving quickly, and although he was not exactly above board ethically, he had really done nothing wrong legally. And to perhaps protect himself from any lawsuits, Halbert systematically bought the stock from many of the investors of the old association. Some of the men, such as William H. Murray, were his friends and would be shareholders or officers in the new club. Ed Hartig, the Chicago Cubs official historian and he's a SABR member, he told me he believes that Halbert's strategy was, quote, to buy out the big guys, the ones who had clout, and the lesser ones would soon follow. Now this is purely conjecture on my part, but what also might have worked in Halbert's failure was at the same time all this was going on, the financial problems of the New York Mutuals and the Philadelphia Athletics were in the news, right at this exact same time, in fact. And neither team could finish out their road schedules, and investors might have worried about the Chicago club and their financial status, and they might have been eager to sell while they had someone at hand who was eager and willing to buy. Perhaps, too, some of the shareholders sold their shares because they did not see eye to eye with Halbert and simply wanted out. And one of these was prominent city official, well-known Mason, and former association president Norman Gassett. Now, Chicago Cubs now have Ernie Banks as their Mr. Cub. But back in the day, if the White Stockings could have an administrator as a Mr. White Stocking, that guy would have been Norman Gassett. After the Chicago fire of 1871, Chicago saw no professional baseball until Gassett. He was the one who practically single-handedly secured a team for the 1874 season. And after Gassett resigned as club president in August 1874, the month Halbert was elected director, by the way, the Chicago Inter-Ocean eloquently praised him to the skies and declared that Gassett, quote, has done more for the elevation of the game than all the other managers in the country. No one has ever managed a club with more economy or given more satisfaction. And Gassett said he resigned as baseball occupied too much of his time and he needed to attend to his own baseball interests. And apparently he did not want to retain any ties to the club, as he wrote Halbert in early October 1876, and he asked to sell his baseball stock. Halbert cryptically replied that he was sorry that Gassett felt he had to do this, quote, but I am willing to believe it is not because of dislike for myself. Consciously, I've always tried to please you. And this is in yesterday's session. This is what I meant this is what I was thinking of when I said that Halbert, could be a little bit underhanded and everything. And again, now this is, again, purely conjecture on my part, but I have nothing else to go on. Perhaps there was jealousy between the two. You know, Gazette was extremely, very well prominent in Chicago, not only in baseball, but in civic affairs. And here comes this new guy making changes and changing things all around. Now, Halbert's papers and the other Chicago Club documents at the Chicago History Museum provide many details about his stock transactions. In fact, Michael Halbert has been there, and I've talked about this. The Chicago Baseball Association's ledger pages indicate that 59 investors had owned 70 shares of stock in the early summer of 1876. And by the end of July, Halbert had purchased 22 shares from among the other investors. And that 22 is the 15 and the 2 and the 5 at the top. And this September 15th memorandum shows that his stock holdings had increased to 33 shares, which included the one share, certificate number 6, he had originally published way back in 1870. And I have that with shown at the top with the arrow over there. And these figures are certified to be correct by Halbert's personal secretary, Thomas Finley. And by the way, this whole thing with the stock figures, it's just you know, I went screaming and gnashing and teeth gnashing in the night dealing with some of this stuff, because this is not my forte. And sometimes the figures weren't matching up, and I had to find additional sheets of paper here, but I finally have it all figured out, I think, as you'll see later on. And the baseball club records disclose that Albert Spalding had once owned one share of stock, although it was purchased by Halbert and retired or canceled on October 30th. This is one of the things that drove me crazy, this one share of stock. And this share accordingly had no market value and represented no ownership in the club. And by November 1, Halbert held 36 shares and the majority of the stock, as the other investors, now down to 30, retain just 33 shares. Okay. And I love this thing right here. Secretary Spalding compiled a list of all the 31 stockholders. This kind of saved the day finding this document right over here. And there's 69 shares. And at the bottom of the document, Spalding wrote, "I certify the foregoing to be correct list of the stock owners as shown by the books of the association." And you can see Halbert's name in the middle of the right-hand page, and I've got the arrow by it, and the stock certificate numbers at the left, and you can see his original stock number, certificate number 6 for his first share of stock. And the DO, by the way, I found out, I had to look this up in a historical dictionary. That's a very archaic form of the word ditto. You know, you put the little squiggly quotation marks underneath something. I figured that's what it meant, but I wanted to be sure. Anyway, I love finding that document there. Now, with Hulbert controlling the stock, he could now officially sever all ties to the defunct Chicago Baseball Association. The directors held a special meeting on November 2nd, 5 weeks after the White Stockings clinched the National League's inaugural pennant. And attending the meeting were President Halbert and directors Albert Spalding, Edward Dexter, and Charles Bartlett. And they presented a lengthy resolution recorded by Secretary Spalding in his minutes, in which they acknowledged that the corporate existence of the old Chicago Baseball Association had ceased, and that a new corporation, the Chicago Ball Club, was now its successor. And the men then formally transferred the assets of the old association to the new ball club, as you can see by the text here. Now, good old Halbert, he did not waste any time getting ready. On the day after this meeting, November 3rd, and by the way, see the 6 at the top there? All the letters were like that. That 6 meant 1876. If there were a 5 there, that meant 1875. And that took me a little bit of time to figure out too. He wrote, the affairs of the Chicago base, he's wasted no time contacting stockholders and studying accounts. He wanted everything all taken care of. And this was the day after the meeting. He started sending all these people letters. And the affairs of the Chicago Baseball Association have finally been closed up. He wrote to the association and Chicago Ball Club investor Thomas E. Courtney the very next day. Halbert had purchased 3 shares of stock from Courtney for $75 each. And Halbert said he was enclosing with his letter a final dividend check. And Halbert was also paying dividends to the remaining shares of the original club stockholders. And researcher Preston Oram examined many contemporary newspapers while working on his history of 19th century baseball. And he concluded that, quote, matters were apparently fixed up, unquote, between Halbert and the shareholders, probably by paying these dividend checks, and that the baseball official, quote, was obviously just scuttling some individuals he considered undesirables. Now, Halbert, of course, had no intention of admitting any undesirables to the Chicago Ball Club, and when the dust settled, William Halbert was the one in charge, just as he was during the National League's inaugural season of 1876. Now, Morgan G. Bulkley of the Hartford Club may have been the league's head, but as John Thorne points out in his article on the founding of the National League in Baseball 11, Bulkley was merely the quote-unquote titular president for, quote, Halbert made all the decisions. And moreover, Halbert continued to assert his authority as he was elected league president for the following year and presided over both it and the White Stockings until his death. And of course, I think it is clear that his principal aim when he sought to reorganize the Chicago club was to consolidate his already considerable control and influence all over all aspects of the game and the business of baseball. One final point. I found this to be fascinating here. All of Halbert's letters are in these things called press books, and they utilize a screw-powered letterpress. And note all these smeared words here. And this just drove me crazy too, because sometimes the words weren't even in the actual letter. And so I talked to a librarian there, and back then, this was their version of the photocopy machine. And people would write letters using a special copying ink, and they would dampen one of these pieces of these tissue paper. All these bound volumes of tissue paper, that's all they were. And they put a piece of oilcloth behind it. They dampened the tissue paper. They put the letter face down and use a screw-powered letter press to press down. And the letter would be printed on the tissue paper. And then you'd have to read it through the tissue paper because the writing would be backwards. And so when you turn the page of the press book, the writing would be on the reverse side of the bound pieces of tissue paper. And these were awfully difficult to read. They'd smear. As you can see, the words were smeared. They'd be cut off. And it just took a lot of time to decipher the words. And I've often thought it'd be a project on William Halbert would be great to do, but boy, it'd be tough reading all these letters. Okay, anyway, thank you very much. Mm-hmm.
Jack, you're the consummate expert on
Yeah, thank you. It was a lot of fun, and by the way, my research I published in Don Jensen's Baseball 12 that just came out a few weeks ago.
Yes.
I'd like to point that out. Yeah.
Yes, I did see that, and I haven't read that article yet. I've been working my way through through the book, which, by the way, is excellent. It has so many great 19th century articles. Mm-hmm. Jack, you had a couple of questions pop in here and a couple of comments. Peter Morris noted that three of the big four 19th century players, three of them were stockholders, but he didn't notice Deacon White. And Mike Hulbert confirms that, who has copies of all the stockholder books. Mm-hmm. And he confirms that Deacon White was not, in fact, a stockholder.
Yeah, I'm glad Michael's here because Michael knows more about this than I do. He spent a lot of time on this. This is his area too. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, between the two of you, I think you have the market covered.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I wonder, because I don't remember seeing his name there at all. I just don't remember seeing it one bit. And I was kind of surprised to see the other guys there. And everything. Right. Until I saw that note in the newspaper saying that a few of the players, not all of them, but they were encouraged to buy the stock.
Right, and Richard Hirschberger just chimed in now that White did in fact end up going to Boston the following year.
Yeah, right. Yeah, he did. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah. Mike Hulbert asked this question: what did Gass do after he was involved with the White Stockings? Did he move on to other promising roles in Chicago? But then Richard Smiley answers, you can answer this also. Richard Smiley says he became prominent, a millionaire, and was a partner in the Lakeside Press.
I did not know that about the Lakeside. I know I've heard of the Lakeside Press, of course. I did not know that. I do know that after he retired, newspapers had like many lengthy tributes to him. And he kept on saying he wanted to get back to his business because he really was one of the most prominent Chicago officials at the time. I have to admit, I did not pursue what he did later on, but I'm glad other people know more about what he was doing. But yeah, I knew he was a prominent businessman, and his business interests really kept him busy. But back in 1874, I mean, people were just crying and saying, we can't have a baseball team. And finally, it was during one of the games, he just kind of came out during the game that, hey, I've got a team for next year, and the whole city just kind of just went crazy. And Norman Gazette did this on his own pretty much.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Also, I wanted to mention that Eric Miklich says or asks, did Hulbert have a hand in destroying the 1873 Philly Whites? 7 players moved to Chicago for the 74 season.
Boy, I don't know. He took the ones from Boston. He snuck those away. I'm not sure. I don't remember anything about. I don't know, and I should know that, but I don't know. To be quite honest, if he did that, yeah, and I should have known that. I should know that from my previous research, but I just don't recall that at all. I'm sorry to say. He probably did, because Halbert had a hand in just about everything. He controlled the team.
Right. Bruce Aldersice also adds that Gassett was a prominent Union Army veteran.
Oh,
And,
yes.
yeah, and he became
Right.
somewhat a big official in the GAR, the Union Army Veterans Group.
He was a prominent Mason too. He was really big in the Masons. And when he died, that was talked about. Or maybe I'm confusing that with Gage. I know I can't remember now off the top of my head. But there was a big Mason connection between one of those.
Okay, and I'll put in one other comment here. Jacob Pomerick adds, in referencing Orem, it's interesting because John Thorne and Bob Bailey have recently digitized all of the Orem supplements that continue all the way up from 1882 to 1891. And those supplements have now available on the SABR website. I'd like to also add that we have a committee now in the 19th Century Committee that is a project committee headed up by Bob Lemoyne, who is doing this. They're doing the citations where they can for all of the Orem supplements. And whether or not they'll come to work finally backwards and do the first edition of this book is yet to be seen. But they are in motion with that project.
Yeah, I'm helping with that. As a matter of fact, I'm doing some of the chapters for that.
Yes, I thought you were one of the people on that. Right.
Mm-hmm. I love that book, by the way. That's phenomenal. Of course, when I've used it before, I've always wished the original volume had notes of some sort. In fact, I did not even know till this came up a months or so ago, that there even were supplements. I had no idea that there were supplements. No.
Well, yeah, in fact, I just mentioned that, Bob just chatted in and said, yes, we have, yes, we are working on it. We are jumping around. Thanks for the plug.
Yeah.
Okay, anybody interested in that project, please call Bob Lemoyne, because that is a fun project, I'm sure. And somebody else had just chimed in here. I want to just, yeah. Oh, it's Richard Smiley also adds, Gassett, not Hulbert, traveled east in 1873 and signed the Philadelphia Players.
Oh,
So,
okay.
Eric, that helps answer your question, Eric.
Yeah, great. Okay.
Okay.
So then that was for the team then, for probably 1874 that he brought in. Yeah, I totally guess that did all that. Yeah.
Right.
Uh-huh.
Okay. Well, any other questions of Jack? Just chat him in, and we'll try to get him over to him.
Okay,
way
thank you
to
very
go.
much, everybody, for your good attention. I'm going to turn
Jack,
off.
that was an excellent presentation. I
Thank you.
really, really enjoyed it.
Thanks very much, everybody.
Yeah, great
Okay.
graphics too.
Yeah.